So today, now that I'm all like exasperated, welcome to the class again. So today we're gonna do, I wanted to add another element to painting with watercolor in general, but this is especially useful with watercolor because it's such a versatile medium. So we're gonna talk a little bit about like drawing with watercolor and like lines and edges and things. So I'm just gonna, I chose Art Nouveau because it's so stylized, so it's perfect with drawing. So anytime you want to stylize something, the best way to do it is to use outlines. The minute you remove outlines and deal more with edges, and I'm going to show you a document, then it starts to look more classical in terms of style. But if you want something to look more stylized, then the fastest way to do it is to do outlines. So I'm just going to show you. So this is the little piece that we're going to work on. And actually, as you can probably see, the watercolor that I did is actually really minimal. They're just basically washes, but it's an interesting piece because of the outline. So this is one where I've kind of switched the importance to something else. And then this background that I did, I don't know if you can see it. These are fun. You don't need them necessarily. You can keep it white, but you can get like all kinds of metallic paints and things. So I just did a little wash of this because Art Nouveau is a really decorative art style. So I just added a bit of that, but you can do that later. You don't have to, whatever. It's just, I did it on the last one because it was fun and stylistic. So yeah, I'm gonna talk about, I'm just gonna share my screen. And all right, so can you guys see, am I still on my camera? You guys don't see my screen yet, do you? I'm having issues today with.
Oh, we see your presentation.
You see my hand right now?
No, I see something that
really?
says
Okay, I don't
lines
have
and edges.
You see this one. I don't have my, it's not updating. Okay, that's fine. All right, so in terms of edges, there's generally three types of edges that we can use in painting. There's a hard edge, which is basically what we're going to be doing with the outlining. So this is sort of an example of hard edge where you have two values that are right next to each other with a really clean line. Then there's soft edges, where the edges are blurred or blended, and you can do this either with color or with gradient, or both. And then lost edges, and actually this is maybe not even the best example, but there's like, it's more blended, but you can even go so far as to, if this were the same color and value as this would completely disappear. So this is really important for creating a lot of drama in our works. And actually, the style of an artist is usually dictated by the way they handle their lines and their edges more than anything else. So even if you are changing subject matter in a piece, not even doing the same mediums, you'll sort of see a consistency between the way they deal with their edges and their lines. And I just want to show like this example here. So this is value. I'm kind of assuming that you guys know this already. So it goes from dark to light. And then color is obviously color. But this is a good example in watercolor of a hard edge where you have a different color and value right here, which is dictating this edge here. This is a really good example of a lost edge. So we know basically that the edge of the cup is falling here, but we don't see it. We just understand it. This is another lost edge here where the shadow of the cup bleeds into the ground. And again, a hard edge. This right here is a soft edge. It's bleeding from like the blues over here, and it's just really soft. And then this is really pertinent for today, but it kind of relates, the use of line weight. And this is something that the Art Nouveau movement did a lot of, and it's you'll see it everywhere in art, and it's probably something that you don't necessarily realize you're looking at until you know about it. But So this is a really good example because the lines on the bottom are thicker and the lines on the top are thinner and lighter. This creates a lot of weight in your drawing and a lot of like dynamic movement. So here's another example. It's basically, just for definition, the strength, thickness, or value of the line. And as I said earlier, it creates a lot of weight. So this is like an example without any line weight. And this is an example with the line weight. So we can already see that this is a more interesting image. Line weights can also suggest lighting. So here we have on the top, there is a really thin line. There's some, you'll notice a little bit of changes in it. So as her arm curves down, it becomes thicker and then it sort of thins out. And then underneath, it's a lot darker. So anything where the shadow side is, like over here too, it's really thick and dark. And then where the light's hitting, it's really thin. And same on this side. So this is with like no lighting information. And then this is with like a thicker edge where the shadows would be. So it creates a lot of volume. The other thing that I kind of talked about in the other classes with the masking fluid are called cross contour lines. And these are lines that actually follow the shape of whatever you're drawing. And they really give a 3D effect. And these don't need to be obvious. So these are obvious examples. So you can draw them in if you have, for example, the veins on a petal, you can draw them in. And that's a perfect example of how it would make sense realistically. You can also draw these in by using your soft and hard flips and lost edges. So this is another way you can tackle this type of thing. These are all things that I use every day when I'm painting, whether in watercolor or oil or acrylic, always thinking about my edges. So yeah, in closing, it adds a lot of richness and sort of, I would say not passion to the drawing, but it looks like if you don't add these differences in line weights and stuff, your drawings kind of look a bit more soulless, where this has a lot more impact. So this is something that I wanted to just discuss today and kind of show you. Let's see, can I? Oh, I've got like, my windows are all weird today. Hey Rob, how do I maximize this again? I don't know what's up with my Zoom today. I did a computer update and I feel like it's, can I just, hey Rob? He's not, how do I, why am I stuck? I'm like not, I can't maximize this. You know why? It like went small on me. Huh? But I can't because stop sharing. There, okay. Oh, all right. Okay, it worked. Now you guys see, do you guys see, wait. Do you guys see my paper now?
Yes.
Oh my God, okay. I don't know what's up today with all this stuff going on. It's weird. Anyways, so does that make sense? Do you guys have questions for that? That's good. All right, so to execute this, there are a few ways of doing this. In terms of watercolor, I don't know if you guys managed to get any ink. Do you guys have ink? I'm just gonna ask you first. Yeah? Yeah? Linda does not. Lisa?
No.
I have Indian ink, or
Yeah,
you asked for one, and I have the other, like
Oh,
Chinese.
it's probably gonna be fine. The reason why I use Indian ink, and I haven't actually tried China ink, it does not move after it's dry. So, and another thing about it is that it's quite vibrant. So this is watercolor. And then I tried to, and this is my ink straight from the vial. So I tried to mix a color that was pretty similar. I went a little bit blue, unfortunately, but you'll see after I went over it with watercolor after they had both dried. And so we were talking about like lost and found and hard edges and stuff. You'll see right here where the actual line of the ink was, it doesn't move. It just becomes darker again. Whereas when I went back over with the watercolor, this edge that was here has gotten washed back out, because as soon as you add watercolor and water back onto watercolor, it will remove or blend out. So I'm trying to use the strengths of the different mediums to give me sort of some richness in my work. So that's why ink. If ever you don't have ink, you just have to plan the reverse. So I can do my edging first with this and my paintbrush. If not, you don't have to get these brushes. These ones are somewhat water resistant, but they will still kind of bleed. So I always use them at the end anyways, although you can try using them at the beginning. But if you wanted to do lines and you don't have ink, you can just, when your thing is dry, you can just go back in with a pen, actually. So it's not like all is lost if you don't have ink today. These pens are really cool. I really like this one because it has actually like a brush tip on it. So if I were to like press and then press and use the body and the tip, I can actually get a fairly interesting line in terms of line weight just from this one pen. I'm just going to show you. It's probably not perfectly dry at the moment, but I'm going to go over it anyways, just to show you how water resistant it is.
Andrea,
Oui.
est-ce que c'est juste de l'encre noire que tu veux ou de l'encre de plusieurs couleurs?
L'encre noire pour aujourd'hui, mais de toute façon, moi j'ai cette kit-là. C'est un peu cher, mais ça vaut la peine.
Parce que j'ai déjà de l'encre dans mes affaires.
Oh, et c'est pas grave.
Moi, j'ai mon encre noire.
Mais normalement, les couleurs, si tu vois, ça match quand même.
OK.
Les couleurs d'encre. Alors, si jamais tu veux utiliser la technique, tu peux mixer les deux. So, okay. The colors are similar. If ever you wanted to mix the two mediums, you can. You can actually like put watercolor down and then ink into it, and it doesn't mess anything up. They mix really well. It's just when the ink is dry, it won't move. When the watercolor is dry, it will move. So that's the difference. So I'm just going to start. One thing to note, gold and metallic things are going to make your water messy really quick. So I usually use them at the end, just so I don't have sparkles all over. The black will also make your water pretty messy pretty quick. So if you want clean water after, it's probably good to have an ink water and then a watercolor water. I actually just take, so I'm just going to take my small little brush here. And because I'm only using the one color and I'm not mixing, I'm actually just going to take it directly from the container, and I have a bit in the tube top, so I'm using it. So in terms of making, it depends on your brush. You can always take your extra sheet that is always good to have on hand. If you use the tip of the brush, you're going to get a fairly thin line. If you use the body of the brush, you can then get something that looks a little bit more like calligraphy. You can also try the angle that you hold your hand. I sort of like mine at a 45-degree angle. I find it gives me the best results. Obviously, I'm running out of water on this, so you're getting like a dry brush technique. It's maybe a good idea to practice a little bit on the side until you go onto your actual piece of art, because with black ink especially, it's really intense next to the white. So you just want to sort of get a feel for it. But yeah, I use, especially with a round brush, that's a pretty soft brush. Let me see if I can find one that's more stiff. I don't have one today. Different brushes are going to do different things. So this one's a little bit more stiff. The stiffness of the brush can change everything. I need a little bit more ink. So I would just do like a couple lines for a second, just to see what it does before we go to our drawing. But this is sort of what we're aiming for. So we want to have on the flowers, what you want to do is anywhere where it's the top and turning up toward the light or turning up towards the top, you want to have this as a nice thin line. And anything that's more toward the bottom of the shape, where it would be like heavier or closer to the ground, you can go thicker and darker on these. If we look to, I'm just gonna like show you guys my screen again. Because I've got, now that I'm refiguring out my stuff today. All right, this one. There we go. Okay. So in this piece by Mucha, if I were to try to actually do a direct copy of this, as you can see, the watercolor is pretty similar. It's just washes that are adding local color, essentially. He's got a little bit of shadowing with the darker blues in here. But for the most part, the interesting work that's done on this piece is in the line work. He's got really thick lines, and this is where it becomes really stylized, outlining all of the foliage. And then when he comes up into the more delicate aspects of the flowers, he's sort of outlined. So here it's like really dark because this and heavy and thick because this is towards the bottom. And then up here, it becomes a really thin line. And then from there, all of the internal lines are even thinner. So this is where you can play with like brushed on lines with your ink here. And then if you wanted to, you could go in at the end with a black pen and even go a little bit further and add some of these fine detail lines. And he's even got a little bit of like, it's not really cross hatched, but he's got little lines that could be used for cross hatching in here. And then he also has some, I don't know if he's used ink or what, probably ink or watercolor from a similar tone. And he's just adding a few extra little lines. So he's sort of varied the darkness of the lines and the color of the lines. This is actually a little bit black and green instead of just black, although black just works. But yeah, just finding ways to vary the line work within the piece and then using the watercolor as local color. Does that make sense so far? You guys are good?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So now that this is dry and I can put this back on top, I'm going to take my little favorite brush here and just remove the water. I don't want to actually add water. This is a little bit of a danger if you're using your ink straight out of your container. You don't want to add water back in there. So I'm just drying my brush and then dipping it and putting some in the lid. And then if I have too much, I can just sort of remove it here instead of adding water to it, because I just don't want to cross-contaminate. So I will start, let's say, I'm just going to make this up as I go along. I usually like to start spots where I just feel less nervous about. So for now, I think it's these leaves. And I also forgot to mention, if you guys want ever to make straight lines or edges, this stuff is awesome. It's just painter's tape from like Home Depot. And I just pre-taped my paper so that if you go over with a wash or something like in a gold or whatever, or your yellow paint or green or whatever, it won't go under the tape. So you're gonna have a nice clean edge, and that's how I did these edges here. That's just with the tape. So that's a nice tool to have on hand. So I'm gonna start with the leaf, and for the most part, if we look at the Art Nouveau work or Mucha's work, these particular lines are pretty much even thickness. So I'm just gonna start going over these. And I try as much as possible not to go back and forth. I really kind of use my wrist to create the angle that I want to go. So if you're gonna draw, let's see. If you're gonna draw arcs, instead of like trying to use your fingers to draw arcs, you can use your wrist. So the pivot, it's like a pivot point. And if you're doing a really big arc, you can use your elbow. You see what I mean? So you can get really even parallel lines that are arced by using pivot points in your wrist or in your elbow, depending on how big those arcs are. We're working small, so it's a little bit less.
Andrea,
Oui.
est-ce que tu préfères travailler à plat sur une table ou sur un chevalet?
Moi, je préfère sur les tables. J'ai toujours, j'ai des mains qui shake. Tu vois pas trop. I have like shaky hands, so I like to work flat. Partly for this reason, because I can sort of stabilize my hand and my wrist. On large canvases, there are times when I actually sit on the floor to work. So that's just me. Not everyone is like that. It's a personal preference. And the problem is some people have like, if I move my wrist like this, you can see it shaking. What happens is, it's not like a neurological issue or anything. It's just my fast twitch muscles on each side of my wrist are turning on and off because they're not sure which one is supposed to work. So this is one of those just annoying quirks that I have. So it does sort of make it more difficult for me to do line work. But that's why also partly I like to use that technique of having like an axis to create my line. So for the leaf ones, I'm just going to go over them. And I'm just gonna, for anyone who doesn't have black ink, you would just paint first, staying in the lines, and then go over it afterwards with a pen or something. So these are sort of equal in weight, but then when I get to the flowers, I'm going to use, let's say this one, I want it to be darker towards the bottom edge and maybe a little bit light in here where it curls up. And then I'm just gonna sort of press harder and use the body of the brush to create that sort of calligraphy style edge here. I'll do one like right here too, if I wanna go like maybe dark and then light where it curves, and then back dark again, and then light. It's almost a calligraphy course, guys. So again, in here, if I want weight to happen at the bottom here, I might start kind of thin in through here. And then just slowly release the pressure and move from the body of my brush to the tip of my brush. And I just like go on all of the undersides like that. So it adds like gravity to the bottom. The minute you start doing what I'm doing and going back over your edges, it's the minute you get into trouble. I still do it. It's kind of a bad habit, but that's where you sort of can end up with those like jagged edges. Does that make sense? How are you guys doing? I don't know exactly. I kind of drew badly my thing. That's okay. I'll just make it up. So anytime there's a curve, you can add a thickness to it, and it just kind of helps to round it out. Same into the centers of the flower. I will send you that document that I made, by the way, guys, so you can have it as reference. This is something that we see a lot in comic book art. because in old prints of comic books, they only had black and white. It's not like today where it's pretty much the same cost to print in color as it is in black and white. So they relied a lot on line weight to make their works expressive. All right, I'm just gonna do like one flower for now, maybe, so that you guys aren't like stuck just watching. And luckily these don't take all that long to dry, the ink, so you can go back over it fairly quickly. So really light pressure on the tops, more pressure on the bottom. Is that me? That better not be me. Just gonna leave it. No, okay. Sometimes
Allô?
I forget to close.
Ah, je peux te rappeler, j'ai un cours de mon cours de peinture. Ok, ça rappelle, hein.
All right, so I've got it started. I'm just gonna let this dry for a minute. How are you guys doing? You guys are all good? Yeah? Okay.
J'enlève le son, puis des fois, je le mets. Ça va, je travaille mes lignes, c'est un peu... c'est pas des lignes fluides, mais
Ouais,
je commence.
ouais, ça prend un peu de pratique. Moi aussi, sont pas parfaits, mais de toute façon, comme j'ai l'impression que we're like wanting to be really perfect when we're doing it because we're really looking at it. And I really felt the same way when I did this one, but after I looked at it later, it didn't actually bother me. So when you step away, sometimes you're happier with the line work. And I was actually zooming into some works of some really famous painters and illustrators. And I was surprised at how imperfect their lines are. So when you stand back, those little defaults that we see because we're doing it, they don't stand out to someone else who's looking at it. So I'm just gonna jump ahead a bit, but it doesn't mean that you guys have to stop. Essentially, like the rest of what I did on this was just stuff that I took from the last class. So if we want like a purple petal here, I'm just gonna wet it a little bit. Now that my ink is dry, as you can see, the ink does not move. So I'm just gonna use, I might use this palette that he has because I like it. Actually, let's see. Go a little bit more blue and then to the purples. So again, with the same logic, if I want things lighter to the top, I can add my lighter blues here, and this will also help with the volume. And then I'm just gonna go in with my purples that are a little bit darker in the bottom. Just kind of flick it up in the direction that the petals are going. And that's essentially how I did the washes of these ones. Add a little bit of water first, again. So I've got the blue down here where the light would be hitting it toward the outside. And then I'm gonna go darker in toward the center where it's purple. It's already picking up my purple, but that's okay, because it wasn't dry. And then here, I just want to let the watercolor effect happen. So I'm leaving it a bit to chance by putting a lot of water. And let's bleed around. So what this does too, you'll notice, it softens the look of the edges a little bit. Before we put the color, it's really stark, like black on white. But as soon as you start putting the color in, it softens the edges a little bit. They don't move, but just because they're not like black on white, they're a little bit softer to look at. So this is one of those classes where the theory, like, it seems pretty easy, but it's actually one of those things that in terms of line work and using them correctly, it kind of takes years to master. But otherwise, the techniques that I'm using are exactly the same as the techniques that we've used in all the other classes. But it can add another element to your work, and it gives you more options also. So I'm gonna pretend like I didn't have ink, and I'm just gonna start the opposite procedure that I would do. So if I didn't have ink and I wanted the same effect, I would just come in here and do like we did the other day and paint my petals. When it comes to painting, whatever technique that you want to do or whatever the final result that you want is, there's always a workaround. You don't always need the exact materials. There's usually a way that you can get something pretty close to what you want with whatever you have on hand. So I'm just going to start with the opposite because I know that my pens aren't all that waterproof. So then quickly. All right, and then this way. And let that dry. Oh yeah, and also just quick with watercolor too, if you're working on an easel and you have too much water, it can run down the page. So with watercolor, I'm almost always flat until I want something to drip, because if I did this, if I tried to do a flower like this right now, and I'm using water to get all those blends like this, except for I'm working on an easel. This is gonna start all pooling like this on the bottom. I mean, you can use this as an effect for sure. If it pools in the bottom, it's gonna be darker. So it's, you can always use gravity with watercolor. So if I wait for this to dry a little bit on the top, and then I set it back down, or slowly set it down, as it dries, it's going to give me a shadow on the bottom. This is where watercolor painting can take a lot of patience. But as you can see, you can really direct the water. But for a full painting on an easel in watercolor, I think I would find it hard. I'm just sort of moving that around. I don't know if you guys can see it because it's still really shiny, but it helps the color to pool in the bottom that way. Which is happening on this one too, because I've moved it. I'll let this dry a little bit, and then I'll go in with another pen so you can see the other steps that you can do. If ever I wanted to do some like lighter details, as you guys already know, while this is still a little bit wet, you can take in, that's got black in it. I'm gonna grab one that's totally clean. This one, I think. Nope. The inks really stay on your brushes, so you gotta, and they can get right into the top here, so you want to make sure they're pretty well washed out. Or just have like extra brushes on hand, which I did, and then I mixed it up. I'll just use this one. All right, so if I wanted to do some extra little like white details while this is still dry, I can just like have a clean and a little bit wet brush and then draw into the wet paint, and it will slowly remove it. So I would follow this sort of contour line that goes within the petals. Or if you wanted to do like an edge that had some highlights on it, again, you would just sort of remove the paint on that edge while it's still a little bit wet. Kind of like that. Trying to get this to dry quicker just so I can continue. Normally I would just take my time, but we've only got like a certain amount of time. So sometimes I wipe things away that I normally wouldn't just because there's too much water and I don't want to sit here for like 4 hours. So like the leaves, obviously it's the same method. I'm just gonna take the colors that I want. So the green colors. I don't mind to go a little bit vibrant on these. Like when I'm doing something that looks more natural, I usually add the complementary in to desaturate a little bit because these colors are a little bit too candy for reality. But because it's Art Nouveau and it was a decorative art, I don't actually mind having some more intense color. I just keep them light to give that sort of vintage feel. So I don't make them too thick, but we can keep those sort of saturated candy hues. And the other thing, just like line weight and something that's illustrative with this, if you want something to look heavier at the bottom, you just make it darker. So we could go a little bit darker to the bottom of the leaves and then have it fade into a more transparent and lighter color towards the top. So you get kind of like a gradual darkening effect or like almost a vignette toward the bottom. So another thing with color, blue tends to recede, so it goes back in space, and warmer colors like reds and yellows will pull your attention forward. So if you're trying to create depth, or in this case, like a heavier bottom, you can go darker and you can also go more blue towards the bottom. And then you can go lighter and also warmer. So more yellows and reds in your greens toward the top. And as you can see, like I always have the colors next to each other on the palette. I tend to keep my colors in family groups. So this red actually doesn't really belong there so much, but these two greens, you could put a blue there instead of this red. But then that way you can kind of mix across them, or you could put a yellow. So you could have like a blue, green to like a sort of yellow, green, and then a yellow. And then with watercolor, you can actually just mix it. Oops, turn my thing. You can just mix across it. And then you can get a lot of variation straight out of your palette. And then they kind of blend together with the water. Louise, are you trying out your inks there?
No, I'm too tired to do it at the same time, but I'll do it over the weekend.
Oh, okay. I wanted to know if it was if they were staying.
No,
Dry.
I'll
Okay.
tell you though. But
Okay.
I have another type of pen with a very thin point, which
Thin
actually
tip.
doesn't bleed. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah,
Work with watercolor.
these art ones are often not bad. This brush one doesn't bleed almost at all. And then I have like the same style, but with like 8 and 5 tips. You can get these in all different sizes.
Mhm.
These ones I've noticed will bleed a little bit. The brush one is actually pretty good. So there are definitely pens out there that will work with watercolor in this way. You just have to find the good ones.
But I really want to buy the color Indian inks that
I
you show.
know, they're so much fun. I find them a little bit more pigmented too, actually.
Andrea, I also didn't have India ink. I have this Chinese ink, which might be what Louise has. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it is bleeding a little bit,
Oh,
unfortunately.
that sucks. Okay. Indian ink is probably the best then, yeah. But otherwise we can like just do the opposite. So I think this is pretty much dry. So now what I would do if I didn't have an ink or an ink that bled, when this is dry, obviously, I would just take whatever pen I have and then do the same thing. And like this one is convenient because it's already a brush, so I can already apply that sort of pressure that I was doing. Some people even might find that they get better control out of this anyways than the ink, because sometimes brushes are hard to work with. I kind of like the feeling of a brush myself, but as you can see, you don't get that much of a difference in terms of the line with this. The only other way to do this, if you had like just a pen like this or something similar, you would have to sort of go over, and then I would do like, let's say I wanted this part thicker. I would do my first line, the outline, and then I would just sort of cut in and then fill that area. So this is another way to get these sort of stylized lines. Let's see if I can find another spot. I'll just do one in black. So like if I wanted, let's say, a thin line and then a dark line at the bottom, I might go around my piece with this pen. And then if I want it to sort of darken through here, I would just sort of trace out where the dark area would go and then just come back and fill it in, because you can't use the angle and like the body of it because it's not a brush, it's just like a flat thing, but you can still control your edge weight with this method. Yeah, so like let's say here it comes up kind of thin, and then here I want it to thicken. I would just draw in there. So I've got the two lines and then just fill in that area black. So that's the other way of getting sort of a similar look with different materials. Although I should be doing this at the end because I suspect this is gonna bleed. I'm gonna test it for fun. Yeah, so this ink obviously does not work, even though it's the same type of pen. It just like runs all over. So you just do it at the end. You just have to know your materials essentially. Yeah, and then the last step that I would do if I wanted to sort of push this further is I might take like a fine pen like this when it's dry. Otherwise it'll probably like just pull all over in the water. And then I might just like, I'm just gonna look at my reference here. It's got some like thin little lines. You can just do some like little stuff like that, like little dots. He's sort of like following what's happening in these petals, and you can just sort of follow those contour lines that I showed you guys in the document, just to sort of get like the volume and the movement of this petal, the way it curves. Like kind of like this way. And here. And up here. So now you can see you can get something pretty rich. You've got the watercolor as a base, And then you've got the pen work or the ink work to add your details instead of trying to add all of your details with the watercolor. The other thing that you could do is, just to make this interesting, now we're getting more into the mixed media theory, but watercolors are fun for mixed media. Yeah, I could take like a brush and just the paint, but a little bit more dry brushed, and then add some of those thin lines this way. This one has like this is actually my my one for masking fluid, so it's not really taking the paint very well. Just a sec. You kind of have to track your brushes when you start breaking out the black ink. You kind of need to pay attention to the brushes that you're using, and I didn't do the best job of that tonight, mostly because I'm stressed about technology. But if you keep a clean brush for your watercolor and have a dedicated one for your, and a dedicated water for your ink, you won't run into these little problems I'm running into. But I can take my brush with the same color or same tones as the paint and just kind of add that extra little bit of subtle detail like Mucha did. It's like a whole other style of watercolor. Something like that. I'm gonna do the same with the green. I want to stay a little bit away from volume on these though, because the style, it's really flat when you look at it. So if I start shadowing like I'm doing here, it actually starts being a different style, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's just something to be aware of. If you're trying to go for a certain style, you kind of have to like read the language, the visual language that they're using within the style and stick to it. Otherwise, you're going to sort of come out into some other thing. So if I'm trying to do Art Nouveau, I want to kind of stick to Art Nouveau. Even this in here, the way it's sort of in the leaves, the way it's sort of bleeding, I don't think that's super true to the style. So I'm actually just going to take some water and brush it out. A little bit more like that. So I probably can't finish this one because I did my steps all backwards just to show you guys some options. But I think it kind of explains different ways of going about the same look with different materials. You guys have questions so far? You good? I'm super busy. So this ink stuff, this is this fun stuff. It's not very opaque. I kind of like it, but it's just quite, I'm gonna use a flat brush. So this is where, because it's like I'm doing a bit more of a wash, I might use a flatter brush. And again, I just always test on the side to see what it's gonna do, just to see, I like to see how like intense it's gonna come out. So if I add a bit of water to it, it's gonna do a better blend. The ink tends to really stick to the paper, so if you want it to be really smooth, I really suggest adding water first, otherwise it gets a little bit streaky. My water is now dirty because of the ink, so yeah, highly recommend having 2 waters when you're dealing with the inks. But I'm going to add a little bit of water to the paper, and then I'll just grab some of my gold and throw that in there. And you could even actually do this before your black lines so that your black lines go over it if you wanted to do a gold background instead of the reverse, because you really want the black to sit on top. So it's another thing where you could like sort of plan in advance. It gives that sort of vintage look to the paper, I find. This nice gold stuff. That sort of aged yellow color. But that's pretty much it. So basically just to add the color, I'm using the washes very lightly that we were using from the previous classes, and then just going in with like different inks and pens and things to get like the extra little bit of detail in there.
Beautiful.
Just pay attention to your line weight. I think that's the key of doing this type of style, is really pay attention to how you're using your lines and like the thickness of the lines and where the weight is falling. Trying to always like sort of make a rule for yourself. You could reverse it. It would be a bit weird, but you could have like heavier on top than the bottom. And if it was consistent, it would probably give you something really interesting. As long as you're consistent. Like if you started doing really dark edges on the top all the time for like half of it and then switched it, it would just look out of place. So you can decide like the light is coming from maybe the top left, and then you always have the darkest points or the thickest lines toward the bottom right side, and then the thinnest lines always toward the top. And even go so far as to like, even if I did this in Indian ink and I wanted this line to almost disappear, we were talking about disappearing edges, I could then take my absolute thinnest pen and then have it almost completely disappear on that top corner, and then go in with my other pen and then really thicken over here to really contrast that very thin edge up there. And it'll add a lot of drama to your pieces. So this is what it looks like at the end. We'll pretend I jumped forward because my ink's gonna bleed all over because I did half-half. But you get the idea. Do you guys have questions? Are you good?
No, it's great. Thanks for the tips.
Yeah, it's the shortest class really. It's probably like, here, I'll switch over. It's probably like I said, in a way it's the easiest technique, but actually this is probably the harder one to master, just because you have to be so precise and like conscious of what you're doing with your edges and things, and it can really add a lot. Like I just feel like this technique probably takes a lifetime to master really. I'm still working on my edges, like every day, working on the edges.
For me, it's even the washes. It has a tendency, I have a tendency to do stains, you know, when it dries out, like the contour, like I'm not good at blending.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like sort of like what this is. Like these types of things where they get all like this, where you get like an edge like this. Oh,
I don't see it.
Can I do it here? Yeah, like these.
Yeah, but yours, at least the color is all even inside of the shape, but for me, like the contour would be darker, so it looks like a stain, so it's not nice.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, that's a water issue, and then it's like although watercolor does have a tendency to do that. So let me see. I did this one. Remember I was moving the paper all over? So we have that on this one a little bit. It's partly a question of paints. I think sometimes some will just do that more than others, but I think it's also a question of, let me see, I'll switch it back, of how much water you're putting. So, and how much paint. So when I try to do, let's say I want to do a wash, I'm gonna get like the worst brush ever. First of all, like a square brush is probably better. This one has acrylic on it. I'll just use this one. Okay. I want to put some water down, but not too much. Like it's just sort of dampened my paper. And then if I'm going to put the wash on top of it, I want to load my brush with a bit of water, but not too much. And then enough pigment that I think is going to cover that area. And then I'm just going to go over, that swatch. And you can even do it so you don't go, you can sort of like over paint your water on there. So I've got like a little bit of extra water to the outside. I didn't go all the way to my wet dry edge, and that'll help this soften. Because if I do like, let me see, I'll do an experiment. If I do one, and then I just go like in the middle of this. So what happens is this is gonna have room to still spread out a little bit. But if I do an exact, oops, it's a bit wet, sorry, a bit much water. If I do an exact square, and then I put right to the edge of that, and I actually put like a lot of, especially if I put a lot of pigment and a little bit too much water, especially in the center, it's gonna give me more of an edge, because it's like the dry paper pulls the pigment towards it. So this will give me like sort of a fuzzy edge. And then this is gonna give me a harder edge when it dries. So I kind of like think about that when I'm painting in within my forms, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Just need a little bit of extra water so it will blur out. Like I think here even, if we can see it, it's while it's drying. It's really a strong light, huh? So I'm already getting like a darker edge here because that went straight to the dry part of the paper, but I had a little bit more room, so I had a bit more water on this side, and the edge is already softer on that side. So if you just leave a little bit of like extra damp wiggle room, it's gonna soften those borders a little bit more. But even this, like if ever this happens and you don't like it, you can go in with just some water. Actually, that's dirty. Just a minute. I've got a water pen here. I'm just gonna break it out. So you can go in with some extra water and like just sort of blend this. There it goes. So I'm just kind of like recoloring over that edge that I don't like, and it will soften it. So I get something that's a little bit softer there than it was. Even here, like if we see how, it's not coming up on camera so well. If we see how intense that little spot is, oh, there we go. And then I'm just gonna like draw over it. And just sort of like, almost like you're erasing, you wanna like wipe or rub into the paper with a little bit of water. Just sort of dab it off. And the color is left, but the edge is much softer. So if ever you have those like edges that are a bit too strong, you can just go back over them. Oh, you can see it really strongly here too. You know what? I might switch the camera because I think you're getting a better read on the other one. Here, just a minute. Yeah, so here is like a really intense edge, and it's because I had, this was sort of drying already, and then I had too much water in here, and it pushes this way. That's what causes those. But here, I'll fix it because this is fun. So it's a little bit harder to fix because it's so much paint there. But I'm just, you don't see me. I'm just gonna keep rubbing in here. Sometimes this stuff adds some of the nice extra detail though, so you don't want to always clean this stuff up. But Okay. It's essentially erased. Here, I'm going to show you the other camera because I think you see it better. It was, couldn't even see it. It was here on that side. So it's like pretty much completely gone. So that might help you out.
Yes, thank you.
That problem. You're welcome.
I'll go to bed, but thank you again
Okay.
for the class. It's amazing.
Have a good sleep. Good to see you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.